Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. I am in our new house again today, and I'm just kind of like trying to figure out where works. Um, Lighting, the reflection on my glasses. I can't help it. I don't know. I'm sorry. And then also, I'm using a new computer now because I had to return my work computer. Again, I'm going to get to that very soon about quitting my job. But today I'm just going to be talking about the only two books that I read in May, which, I was doing so well. I was doing four and four, and that was my goal is every month do four books. I think I did six in April, and then May I just slowed down. I was just kind of burnt out on books. And, we started moving and things were just super crazy. So, I didn't get to a lot, but if you're new here, my name is Rachel Gonzalez. I am a recovering perfectionist, just trying to become more like Jesus and live in God's perfect will for my life. I'm going to discuss just these two books that I read, actually listened to in May. I really have still been loving the apps like Audible, Hoopla, Libby, those apps that you can listen to books. It's really the only way that I'm getting through book content right now. I do have grand plans for when we start our homeschool journey that I would start like really reading books, paperback or hardcover books. And so stay tuned for that. But so the first book that I read in May was called Jesus Revolution. And I saw that this was a movie, and I haven't watched the movie yet. I had all the plans to watch the movie, but just haven't had the time. So this book specifically was about like the 60s, 70s, where people were really starting to kind of come back to Jesus, really start to think about Jesus and his life and live like him. I feel like a lot of people were having spiritual experiences. Obviously, there was also a lot of drug use during that time. And so they talk a lot about that. And then mostly like one guy's life and how he experienced his spiritual calling. And so I thought that this book was really neat because um, I've talked a lot about how I have had like my own kind of spiritual awakening, how I um, have lived through things and done things where it just feels like there is no other way for me to get through this besides God. And so it was neat to kind of see how this guy's life was really pulled out by God and his relationship with Christ. And so that was really neat. And then also just kind of to hear, about the lifestyle during that time and how people were living and what they were doing. And when growing up, I wasn't really into history. And then as I've gotten older, especially when I was teaching fifth grade, I really got into like learning more about historical events and things like that. And so I have really started to enjoy historical reports more. And so this was kind of cool, especially knowing that like this is the time where like my dad was living through, my mom too, but my dad talks a lot about like, the 60s and 70s and how they were and stuff like that. And he enjoyed going to concerts and, stuff like that, sporting events and everything. And so hearing this was just really neat to me. I do recommend this book. I only gave it 3 stars, mostly because, as I was listening to it, I was kind of like skimming. And so just kind of thinking of like other things, or I wasn't giving it my full attention. And so that's kind of why I was like hoping to watch the movie, because then I could really like concentrate. But again, we were moving and things like that. So and this is kind of why I stopped listening to books too, because I listened to these two books and then realized, I'm not really paying attention as much as I should be or could be, because I'm so distracted, with packing or, moving laundry, things like that. So that's why I sort of switched to podcasts. And, so anyway, really I really didn't give it my full attention. And so I gave it a 3. The next book that I read was called Unschooled. It's raising curious, well-educated children outside the conventional classroom. And for this book, I also gave it a 3, mostly for the same reason, but also because I think that I don't know, when I'm like reading these homeschool books or things like that, I really want to um get like some kind of like revelation out of it. It's kind of like when I went to Capturing Kids Hearts and I had heard like, oh, it changed my life. That's like what I'm looking for kind of in these books, is like a real like, oh, aha, like I'm going to do that in my homeschooling journey, or this is what I want for, homeschooling and stuff. And it's not really what I'm getting. So, it was good. They talk a lot about, just not doing any kind of book work or seat work, things like that. It's just really more about living out in the world and, what that looks like and stuff. And I think through reading this book and then through talking to some people about unschooling, I've just realized that that's not really what we're going to do. I think, there are going to be some days that we don't do school, and that's fine. And, I've already thought about, taking like a year round approach. And so that means that we can literally do our daily rhythms every single week throughout the entire year and not take any real breaks. So that way that gives us a little bit more flexibility. Like we're about to take a 3-week vacation right now. And so, it gives us the ability to say, oh, well, while we're on vacation, maybe we'll only do like 1 day of schoolwork, or we won't do any schoolwork, or whatever we want to do. It's really the freedom. And that's kind of one of the nice things about doing homeschool. But I do think that there are going to be days, and I'm thinking about 3 days a week, that we will do some more like not just seat work, but like, stations and like things like that. Because the reality is that I went to school for teaching. I taught for 7 years before, becoming a school counselor and then an assistant principal. And I can't just unlearn what I know, right? I also attended the public school system for 12 years. And there are some things that do work about school. My son loves stations. And so there are things like that that I think, I will set up, I will create, I will work on. But I think there are other things, like I'm not spending hundreds of dollars on curriculum right now. Like it just doesn't seem necessary to me to spend like what I would love to do as a Becca, but it's like $900 for a year. And to me, it just seems unnecessary. For my kids at this time. I think that there are things that we can do, and we will take a little bit more of an unschooling method with that. So, do I think that this is the only way to do things? No. It's just the way that we've decided to do things, because I don't want to feel like we have to do, these lessons in this order. And, what happens if my son is too advanced, or what if he's not getting it, or, whatever. It's like, I really want to have the ability to just kind of monitor and adjust the way that I want to, and make it a little bit more tailored to my kids. So, like I said, I mean, the unschooling book, it was interesting information. I just don't think that way of schooling is going to be what we do. And so, it's good to have that perspective, but not really what we're planning on. So, those are the only 2 books that I read in May. And, I haven't read many more in June. I think I read 1 more book in June, and then I tried to read another book, and, I didn't love it. So, I think maybe, I'll just talk about those, because something that I'm thinking I'm going to do is, instead of doing a June book review, video on its own, I think I will talk about the podcast that I've been listening to, because, once I switched to podcasts, it got a lot easier for me to just be listening all the time, like in the car, on my AirPods while I'm packing and things like that. Because when I'm not fully paying attention to those things, it doesn't really matter as much. I'm not missing as much content. And so I think I'll just talk a little bit about that in my, in place of my June book review. So in June, I did read also Modern Miss Mason, which is the Charlotte Mason type of homeschooling is basically just reading books. They don't do any kind of like academics, no seat work, no book work or whatever, but they do read a lot. And then, they do like copy work and stuff like that. So, I thought that book was also interesting. Modern Miss Mason on Instagram is like, I think her whole premise is like taking Charlotte Mason's theories and making them more modern, and fitting them into like her modern world. Charlotte Mason is from like the 1800s. So, it was just a long time ago. But I do think that there's also value in that. I think there's value in just reading good literature all the time, and you can learn a lot from that. Do I think that it's necessary to sit down and do like a poetry unit and only talk about poems and what poems are? Do I think that's necessary? No. But I do find value in doing things like that as well. But I think with, Charlotte Mason, it was just like, we're just going to read books and we're going to pick out, what's happening them, what the text structure looks like and stuff. And that's it. So again, I think like unschooling, Charlotte Mason, traditional schooling, it's like there's so much to choose from. And I don't think that it has to be just one way or another. And so I did also rate Modern Miss Mason as a 3-star book. I liked the information, but everything that I have read about homeschooling, and about schooling in general is honestly like what your take is on it. And do you agree with it or not? Do you think it's going to work or not? And so I think that with reading all of these books, I've noticed like I just really want to do kind of a hodgepodge. We're going to read books often. We're going to read good books. We've been reading, I brought home a couple of like Froggy books. Okay. And if you don't know who Froggy is, it's a series of books and it's about a frog and his life with his parents or whatever. And, it's a fiction book, right? So it's about frogs, but they're like the frogs are talking. And so we're reading these books and he says like, let's go eat burgers and flies, which obviously is a take on burgers and fries. And my sons are like, why is he saying burgers and flies? That's so funny. Well, then we start talking about, well, frogs eat flies, and so, well, why do frogs eat flies? So we're talking about like science, even though this is a fiction book. So like I can understand the value, like Miss Mason did, is to just read books and talk about what's happening in them. I mean, yeah, it's fantastic. It's good stuff. But I also think there is more to it than that as well. And so, setting up experiments or science lessons based around what we have just read, I think is also cool and important. So, that's really the only book that I read in June. And then I started to read the book, Diaries. I had it on hold with my Libby app and it came up. The reason that I had it on hold is because I heard about it on a podcast. Andy Cohen, I think is his last name. Andy Cohen was on a podcast that I was listening to and he talks about his book and I thought it was going to be more of like a parenting book and it turned out to just really be his diary of his life as a parent. And I might have found this book interesting had I known anything about Andy Cohen or his life at all. But I don't watch Bravo. I don't watch any of the shows that he is on. So I don't really know who he is. And I just was like, okay, yeah, I mean, this is interesting. Like, this is his life and, this is great, but I'm not going to listen to 10 hours of this book when like, I don't even know who he is. And I thought he was going to do like a lot more. This is how I'm parenting. This is, what have you. So it was not that. And so I stopped listening to that about probably like 2 hours in to the 10-hour book. And, I don't like not finishing a book, right? Because I don't like not finishing anything, which is why I'm currently also working through some podcasts that I came to later on. I'm like working through their early ones because I have to listen to all of them. It's a disease. But like I say, I'm a recovering perfectionist, and it is okay that I did not finish that book. And I'm telling myself all the time, it's okay that I abandoned that book. It is okay to abandon books. When you don't like them or you are not feeling a reason to continue listening, right? And so I did not listen to that book the rest of the way through. Still a bummer because I cannot count that as one of my books read for this year. I don't think I'm going to do like, oh, this year I read 48 and a half books. So, oh well, chalk it up to a loss. It's fine. But those are all the books that I have been listening to in the past 2 months. Like I said, I will kind of talk about next time, probably not the next video, but coming up soon, I will talk about some podcasts that I've been listening to, the podcasts that I love the most. So stay tuned for that. And if you will, just in the comments, go ahead and tell me what you have been reading, what you've been loving. Tell me any podcasts that you've been listening to or think I need to be listening to. And I will see you next time.